Welcome to Choir Talks. My name is Greg O'Neill. I'm the worship pastor at Ridgecrest Baptist Church. Thanks for joining me today. Let's read some scripture. I want to grow in my prayer life this year. I'm not sure that I'm seeing that yet, but I'm drawn to see prayer in the different passages of scripture as I read. So here's one that I came across this week in the first chapter of Colossians. It sounds like this. For this reason, since the day we heard about you, we have not stopped praying for you. We continually ask God to fill you with the knowledge of His will through all the wisdom and understanding that the Spirit gives, so that you may live a life worthy of the Lord and please Him in every way, bearing fruit in every good work, growing in the knowledge of God, being strengthened with all power according to His glorious might, so that you might have great endurance and patience, and giving joyful thanks to the Father who has qualified you to share in the inheritance of His holy people in the kingdom of light. For He has rescued us from the dominion of darkness and brought us into the kingdom of the Son He loves, in whom we have redemption and the forgiveness of sins. Sorry, I know that's a long passage to read, but it's one of the prayers of Paul, and I love to see how he writes out really specifically what he is praying for the people that he's writing to. And when I sit down and pray for others, or when I'm a part of a group that prays for others, we will stop and pray for the physical needs of someone that we're praying for. But what if you don't really know of any physical needs for the person you're praying for? Maybe, in fact, there's other things that might be very important that you can pray for another person. So Paul is writing a letter to a church that he didn't start and to a people that he doesn't really know. He hasn't met them in person. He doesn't know their ongoing physical needs. He is hundreds of miles away from them in jail. Nevertheless, he prays this influential prayer over them. So what does he pray for? Could kind of lean over his shoulder and see here. So starting that again, he says, for this reason, since the day we heard about you, we have not stopped praying for you. We continually ask God to fill you. By the way, let's just pause right there. I love the persistence that he's mentioning in the way he prays for them. He says, I've not stopped praying, and we're continually asking God. That's challenging to me. And sometimes I'm not as persistent maybe as that in prayer, but he is praying in an ongoing way for them and with the persistence that faith requires. So what is it that he asks for them? First of all, he says, we're asking God to fill you with the knowledge of His will through all wisdom and understanding that the Spirit gives. So the first thing he prays for them is knowledge. And specifically, it's knowledge of God's will. It's not just an esoteric head knowledge. It is the knowledge to know how to live and how to walk in a way that is pleasing to God, that is according to God's plan and God's way. And so I think that's really interesting. If in a way that we can pray for other people, we can pray that they would have knowledge, and that knowledge would be, as he says here, from the Spirit. It's not a self-acquired knowledge. It's not an understanding of life that we gain from the culture around us. It's knowledge from the source of understanding. It's knowledge from the Spirit. The second thing he prays, he says, so that, in verse 10, so that you may live a life worthy of the Lord and please Him in every way, bearing fruit in every good work and growing in the knowledge of God. So the second thing he's praying for here is fruitfulness. Knowledge in and of itself can lead us to pride, especially knowledge about spiritual things. Think about the Pharisees. But it's knowledge from the Spirit that should lead us to obedience, and it should lead us to fruitfulness. The Spirit gives us knowledge for a purpose, so that it'll make a difference. He says this knowledge has come so that you will live a life worthy. The knowledge that the Spirit gives, it makes a difference. It leads to life change. It leads to a different way of living and walking, a life that is intentional and purposeful and impactful. And he says that this way of living would be to please God, to please Him in every way, is what he says. Um, I meditated a little on that phrase because it's in stark contrast to what you hear a lot in our society, which is do what makes you happy. But the knowledge that the Spirit gives and what Paul is praying for them is so that it will please God in every way, not be a self fulfilling, please me in what I do. So he's praying that they'll live the life of a disciple, and that life should bear fruit. Every living fruit bearing plant should be producing fruit as a part of its regular life. Over and over in the New Testament, fruit is used as an analogy for the way that we should live and the results of how the Spirit works in our lives as we live. And he also mentions a phrase that I thought about some. He says that we should be growing in our knowledge of God. Now, here, this phrase, knowledge of God, is not the same knowledge in the first verse when we were talking about a knowledge about the way to live to please Him. But here it's a knowledge of who He is, and that we should be growing in our understanding and in our experience with God. And that's a reminder to me that I should always be growing in my understanding of God, my walk with God. I should understand Him more this year than I did last year. And that's a challenge. Do I really, am I really there? A third thing that he prays for, he says, being strengthened with all power according to His glorious might, so that you may have great endurance and patience. He prays for their power. If we want to see God do great things, we need to be praying for the power of God to be displayed in the believers' lives around us. This power is God's and not ours. He empowers us for to be obedient, to do the things that He's called us to do. And this power results, as he says here, in endurance and in patience. So patience means enduring through difficult circumstances. But patience should not be confused with like an inaction, just doing nothing and being patient. Patience here is an endurance through action, because he's telling them he wants them to be fruitful. But in the midst of that, there are going to be difficult times, and they've got to have the power to work through those difficult times with patience, with endurance. And then the last thing he says is giving joyful thanks to the Father who has qualified you to share in the inheritance of His holy people in the kingdom of light. He mentions thanksgiving. In fact, he qualifies it as joyful. He is teaching these disciples to give thanks and to do it with a posture of joy before the Lord. When we lose our sense of joy and thankfulness, we become critical and pessimistic. But when we're empowered by God, and we're joyful, and we see God's work in our lives and His blessings, and so we are thankful. And then he ends this prayer reminding them of some things they can be thankful for. He says that we share in the inheritance along with all believers. He says that He is, I love this passage. Let me just read it again. For He has rescued us from the dominion of darkness and brought us into the kingdom of the Son He loves. I love that verse. So He is, he gives us His inheritance, and He has rescued us. He's grabbed us out of the kingdom of darkness and put us in His kingdom of light. He goes on to say that we have redemption in Him. Here, the word redemption means to release a prisoner from the payment of a ransom that he owes. And then lastly, he says that He has forgiven us. So think about the way Paul prays, not just for spiritual needs or bad circumstances, but he's praying for these believers to have spiritual needs met, to have spiritual outcomes in their lives. So just to remind you, he's praying for knowledge, to know how to live to please God. He's praying for fruitfulness so that their lives will count, make a difference, and be influential. He's praying for power, God's power to be displayed in them. And he prays that they will live lives of thanksgiving. I hope that there are brothers and sisters out there that I rub elbows with that are praying for me in the way that Paul prays for these believers. And I hope that I will be persistent and stop and pray for the spiritual needs of the people who are around me to make a difference. Have a great week.